You know that feeling of absolute frustration when you hear about scammers stealing personal data or some syndicate locking up an entire hospital's network and they just never seem to get caught? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving deep into literally one of the most frustrating mysteries in modern law enforcement. Picture this. A country has these incredibly powerful ironclad laws on the books to punish cybercriminals, yet those exact hackers consistently evade justice. What we're looking at today is the massive disconnect between asserting power on a piece of paper and actually catching a digital criminal who is sitting comfortably thousands of miles away. It's a fascinating puzzle of international law, and by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why the system is so broken and how the world is scrambling to fix it. To untangle this giant web of laws, here is our roadmap. We're unpacking 5 key pieces: the jurisdictional starting point, the cross-border bottleneck, the Budapest objections, the brand new UN treaty, and finally, India's completely unresolved sovereignty paradox. Let's just jump right in.
Starting off with part 1, the jurisdictional starting point, or honestly, what we should really call the illusion of reach.
If you look at the rulebook, domestic laws can sound incredibly powerful. Take Section 75 of India's IT Act, for example. It gives a law something called extraterritorial reach. Basically, this means that if a crime is committed outside of India, but it involves a computer, a system, or a network physically located inside India, the government asserts full jurisdiction. So, practically speaking, if a hacker in Eastern Europe breaches a server sitting in Mumbai, boom, the Indian government claims authority over that crime. It's a massive flexing of legal muscle, and a really bold claim over cybercrime with a foreign nexus. But here is where we have to completely puncture that illusion. Asserting jurisdiction on a piece of paper is easy. The agonizing reality is actually getting your hands on the offender or securing the digital evidence you absolutely need for a conviction when that data is sitting on a server in another hemisphere. That is a completely different ballgame. This massive gap between legal theory and physical reality is the absolute core of the cross-border cybercrime paradox.
Which brings us right to part 2, the cross-border bottleneck. This is where theory violently crashes into the actual mechanics of enforcement. Think about it, when a suspect, or even just their digital footprint, is in a totally different country, police can't exactly cross the border and kick down a door. They have to rely on tools like MLATs, mutual legal assistance treaties. These are formal government-to-government agreements to share evidence, records, or witness testimony. India, for instance, has an MLAT with the US. Another tool is extradition, governed by the Extradition Act of 1962. But here's the catch. Extradition has a super strict rule called dual criminality. That means the act has to be considered a crime in both countries. If you get targeted by a highly sophisticated digital scam that just isn't legally defined as a crime in the scammer's home country, extradition is entirely off the table. So while these tools technically exist, they create massive friction in the digital age. The MLAT process is notoriously, painfully slow. We're talking about formal diplomatic requests, physical paperwork, crossing desks at multiple government ministries. It can take months, sometimes literally years, to process. Now, think about digital evidence. It can be altered, encrypted, or deleted in a single keystroke. By the time the bureaucratic paperwork actually clears, the digital ghost has vanished. Plus, cybercriminal syndicates aren't stupid. They deliberately set up shop in jurisdictions with weak enforcement, or places that have absolutely no functioning treaty relationship with the victim's country. It is a true bureaucratic nightmare. Moving on to part 3, the Budapest Convention objections. This represents the world's very first major international attempt to solve this exact cooperation nightmare.
I actually found it fascinating that the world realized this was going to be a huge issue over 2 decades ago. The Council of Europe drafted the Convention on Cybercrime way back in 2001, mostly known as the Budapest Convention, and it entered into force in 2004. It was a totally pioneering international treaty aimed specifically at speeding up cross-border evidence cooperation. But here is the massive kicker. A global tech heavyweight like India never signed or acceded to it. Not then, not now.
And India's refusal wasn't just arbitrary. It came down to 2 deeply held objections. First up was a process objection. India wasn't a member of the Council of Europe, meaning they had absolutely no seat at the drafting table. They felt it was a complete violation of sovereignty to be pressured into following rules they had zero hand in writing. Second, and maybe more importantly, was a massive substantive objection regarding Article 32B of the Convention. This article essentially allows a foreign police force to digitally reach across borders and access data stored in another country without asking the host government, as long as they get consent from whoever has lawful authority to disclose it.
To nations like India, China, and Brazil, this felt like digital trespassing, a direct erosion of their sovereign control over data physically stored within their own borders. Because of those deep-seated objections, India and Russia began aggressively advocating for an entirely different approach. Let's look at part 4, the UN Cybercrime Convention and this massive global shift. The momentum here has been incredibly rapid, at least for the normally sluggish pace of international diplomacy. Initiated by a Russian proposal in 2017 and following about 5 intense years of drafting, the UN General Assembly adopted it by consensus on December 24, 2024. Fast forward to October 2025, it opened for signature at a high-level ceremony in Hanoi, grabbing an initial 65 signatures on day 1 and hitting up to 76 signatories by mid-2026. It remains open for signature at the UN headquarters in New York until the very end of 2026. So, what is actually under the hood of this new treaty? It represents some massive substantive breakthroughs. First off, it's the first globally legally binding framework for sharing cross-border electronic evidence in serious crimes. It directly criminalizes cyber-dependent offenses and tech-facilitated crimes like online fraud and child sexual abuse material. Notably, it's a genuine first for a global treaty to criminalize the non-consensual dissemination of intimate images. But perhaps most importantly, for that whole MLAT bottleneck problem we talked about, it establishes a 24/7 global cooperation network. This means instead of waiting months for diplomatic cables to clear, designated tech crime units can literally pick up the phone and initiate urgent data preservation requests immediately. That is a real game changer. But we have to look at both sides of the coin here impartially. While it is undeniably a universal milestone, literally the first genuinely universal cybercrime cooperation instrument ever created, it has faced heavy criticism. Human rights organizations, massive tech companies, and independent experts have all raised alarms. They argue the definition of cybercrime in this treaty is way too broad. For instance, without ironclad safeguards, a regime could potentially use this newly streamlined global network to track down political dissidents just by labeling their online posts as cybercrime. Critics are incredibly worried that the treaty relies entirely too much on individual states to safeguard human rights during this rapid cross-border data sharing. Which brings us to the climax of our explainer, Part 5, India's Unresolved Sovereignty Paradox, or, as I like to call it, the big irony. Check out this real-time geopolitical paradox. India spent years demanding a UN-led alternative to the Budapest Convention. They got it. They actively participated as a negotiating state throughout the entire 5-year drafting process. And yet, India still has not signed the UN Convention. Right now, they are declining to sign the exact instrument they demanded and helped shape, citing ongoing evaluations of what it actually means for their sovereignty and data sharing obligations. It turns out it's the exact same category of fears that kept them out of the Budapest Agreement decades ago. Talk about coming full circle. Now take a look at this number on the screen, 3. Despite all the fanfare, the high-level ceremonies, and dozens of initial signatures, only 3 states, Qatar, Azerbaijan, and Vietnam, have actually completed the legal act of ratification. And this is a really crucial legal nuance to take away from this explainer. Posing for a photo to sign a treaty and actually changing your domestic laws to formally ratify it are 2 entirely different things. The UN Convention needs 40 ratifications to officially enter into force, meaning practically speaking, this treaty still has a very long way to go. And for India, this isn't just some settled historical footnote. It's a live, high-pressure situation playing out right now. The Supreme Court of India has directly intervened, explicitly asking the central government to take a considered position on ratifying the convention. The executive branch is under active institutional pressure to make a definitive decision because, frankly, every single day they wait, borderless cyber scams continue to affect everyday citizens. Which leaves us with this final, overarching thought to consider today. We have powerful domestic laws that just cannot reach across borders, and global treaties completely bogged down by fears of overreach. So, will the absolute demand for national sovereignty ultimately prevent the exact global cooperation we need to stop borderless cybercrime? Or is cross-border cybercrime basically impossible to prosecute under our current global structure? It's a massive tension that remains completely unresolved today. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and as always, keep questioning the systems around you.